This webinar is brought to you by MatchPal, the only specialty-specific residency advising platform. We help you match your dream specialty by providing one-on-one personalized guidance from expert resident advisors. Schedule your free consultation at matchpalmedical.com.
So I guess why don't we get started? We'll get started with some intros. So my name is Daniel. I'm an interventional radiology resident in Northwell in New York City, part of the MatchPal leadership team, and really excited to introduce two of my fantastic colleagues. We have Michelle and Ian, so I'll let them give them a chance to introduce themselves as well.
Hey everyone, I'm Michelle. I actually just graduated from family medicine residency. I'll be starting my fellowship in sports medicine at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson in New Jersey. Super excited to be here, and I'm one of the family medicine mentors.
Hey everyone, I'm Ian. I'm currently completing my transitional year in Wisconsin, and I'll be doing diagnostic radiology at Medical College of Wisconsin next year.
Awesome. Yeah. So, obviously we have, one IR, one DR, one FM, very, diverse backgrounds as far as, our medical school experiences and, our specialties as well. And so we're excited to share those perspectives with you from the perspective of, our position as advisors, right? So, we've basically been we've been fortunate to work with tons of different students, editing a lot of statements, working on a lot of applications. And I think that's the power of this, is when you see a lot of, everything is a numbers game. So when you see a lot of these, you get good at identifying, what works and what doesn't. And you also are able to provide good advice to students. So, for those of you that don't know us here at MatchPal, we're a specialty-specific advising and consulting company. Our job and our mission is to really be at the forefront of delivering, ERAS-related advice to students who need it from a resident perspective. And that's really what we believe in. We believe that a lot of advising companies obviously exist out there, but our primary difference is that we're completely and 100% resident driven. And, we know what it's like, because we honestly all just did it ourselves within the last few years. So that's a little bit about our unique perspective. And, the things that we help out with is obviously personal statement services, applying to VSAS and VSLO, although that would be more so for next season, mentorship, how to do well in away rotations, and how to just be a good medical student as a fourth year, and obviously residency interview prep and preparing the application itself. We do offer tutoring, but that's not our primary focus at this time. So on the agenda for today, we're going to talk a little bit about the personal statement and how it should be structured, as well as the overall narrative, right? How do you talk about your life story in the form of a narrative? We'll also discuss red flags. We do need to be able to talk about them should they be relevant to you, what to avoid, and then we'll do a couple of live personal statement editing examples with our panel. So let's just jump right into it. So, when we're doing the personal statement, I think we start off here, we talk about this a lot, how do we tell someone where to start? So I usually advise students to answer these three questions with their statement. Basically, what was your road to medicine? What inspired you to pick the specialty that you're applying for? And then what makes you a valuable addition to a team, right? So if you have no idea what to write about, you should start by writing as much as possible, even if it's 2, 3, 4 pages, whatever it is, to try to answer these questions, right? Ultimately, once whether you work with us or with other mentors or whoever, ultimately your statement should really not exceed 1 page. That's really the kind of the unspoken rule. But this is where you start. And obviously some students, maybe if you're a non-traditional student, you have gap years or major red flags, things like that, maybe you might go over that 1 page limit, but for most students, it's going to be 1 page, right? I guess maybe Ian and Michelle, do you guys have maybe any other advice that you think you would give for the student who's starting off completely, maybe lost, or maybe just like overwhelmed and has no idea where to start aside from answering these 3 questions?
Sure. Yes. So the way I was given this advice a long time ago, but when you don't know where to start, sometimes it's helpful to just put thoughts on a page, like open a Google Drive, put all your thoughts down about, why did you do this? Why are you doing this specialty? Or like, hey, I want to include this experience. and put them all on a piece of paper, like just a page, so you have it if you're kind of that type of thinker. And then when you read through it, it could just be bullet points, be like, all right, I really like this. Maybe I can like start something with that. And it's okay to not start from the beginning. That I always feel like the first paragraph and the last paragraph are usually the hardest because they're your intro and ending. You can always just write like, hey, this was the experience I really want to include. Let me just write about this experience, and things flow. They don't have to be all straight. You can start from the middle and then go towards the end.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Ian, what were you going to say?
I was going to say something really similar. I think when I was writing my personal statement, I noticed that I was able to interchange these different paragraphs that answer these questions really well. It doesn't really matter the order in which you're answering these questions per se. Sometimes it has a more logical flow if you go from, before medical school to your perceived future. But if you want to answer these questions in a different order, or just put everything down on paper and then rearrange it, it tends to work really well doing it that way as well. So I agree with Michelle. Write down a lot of content. It can be way over a page, and then you can work on narrowing it down.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. So let's go into the next thing, right? So like building a narrative. So, hopefully you have a bunch of ideas, at least bullets, paragraphs, whatever it is. And now you really want to start to organize it, right? I think one important thing to keep in mind in this process, right? You want to think about who is your reader, right? I think a lot of the times when people are writing statements, we forget who our reader is because we're so overwhelmed with writing a good statement. You don't really recognize who are you writing this statement for, right? Yeah. So I think that, when you're thinking about this, think about that, this is a program director or a resident or some other faculty, and that is someone who is reading a high volume of statements. And remember, they're basically looking at two things. One is like, do they relate with you in any way? Right. And a lot of times that's a personal, like part of like a personal journey or a hobby or some other thing that like maybe something that you overcame that they also overcame. But at the same time, they're ultimately, and I would say that's probably secondary. The primary thing they're looking for is, does you as the applicant, are you demonstrating a really robust understanding of the specialty and a fit for the specialty based on the words and stories you're choosing, right? And so obviously that's a really long roundabout way of saying, like, are you a good fit for a program and for a specialty, right? And so, with that in mind, you could probably talk about your favorite specialty. Hopefully, if you're really passionate, you could talk about your favorite specialty for a long time. But you really do have to be very succinct, right? Because you only have one page to talk about all of these things, right? And remember, the statement is it should be consistent with your application. You shouldn't necessarily regurgitate your entire CV, but there should be also nothing that contradicts something that is in your application, right? So, writing that you love research, for example, and want to have a really long, prosperous career as an academic faculty because you love research, and then you have no research on your CV, that doesn't really make sense, right? So make sure that your storyline is consistent. Maybe, I don't know if Ian and Michelle, if you guys want to chime in on, maybe you can have a couple of pearls on, the whole concept of fit for specialty. Maybe we could talk about that for a second.
Sure. So family medicine, and I would say probably pediatrics, goes into the realm of like, we're very like, there's a lot of health advocacy that goes into and preventative care, but we're also just like, I don't want to say lovey-dovey people, but like empathy is a really big part of our personal statements, which is very different than you look at the surgical subspecialties where it's just a different type of flow. And it doesn't have to be like, I love people and I love all of this. But there is some like passion can come across differently depending on the specialty that you're applying to. So it's very helpful when you know your specialty and know what you want to say. And that's why we're here kind of to help with that, because every personal statement for a specialty is going to be different. But it's very nice when like we read a personal statement, like I've read personal statements when I've interviewed applicants and be like, this is a great fit for us because our program offers all of the things that they're looking for. Versus if you apply to a program, somewhere else that barely offers what you're talking about, then we're like, I don't know if this applicant would really thrive here. So that's something else to keep in mind when you're applying is what I'm writing about and what I'm talking about in my specialty, does it fit? And nationally, all programs are different. So it's always good to know that when you're applying. Doesn't mean you have to change your personal statement. You just have to be aware that is a part of what fit comes in for the personal statement.
Exactly. I echo that a lot. I mean, I think that even if you took like two programs in the same specialty in the same like city across the street from one another, they could be very different as far as their culture, their clinical focus, their research focus, et cetera. So, you know, being aware of that is important. I mean, you shouldn't sit there like, I mean, some people, if it's like if it's your top choice program, you may revise parts of your statement so that you appear better geared for that. But obviously, as you can imagine, that's going to be extremely exhausting to do for all of the programs you're applying for. So, you know, generally speaking, you would hope that by just being your genuine self, you know, you find that fit somewhere and you fit in somewhere where I guess like you belong. Ian, did you want to add anything on this note?
Yeah, definitely. One personal experience I had when writing my personal statement for the radiology application was trying to balance the fact that I really do love talking to people. And I know that patient narratives or patient interactions can make a really strong story in the personal statement, while at the same time knowing that there's a stereotype of certain specialties like radiology, pathology of not having a lot of patient interaction or patient contact, and wondering how you can reconcile two of those things. If you're in one of those specialties, it shows a lot of nuanced understanding when you realize that even non-patient facing specialties have so much patient interaction, whether they be talking to patients on the phone, working and doing, you know, image guided procedures in radiology, and being able to tie those things together and show that you really understand how you are always like working from a patient-centered perspective really can make strong narratives even for non-patient facing specialties. So that's one thing that I thought was really helpful when I was writing my own statement. Another thing that was just mentioned was the idea of personalizing your statement to really make sure that it's fitting the program you're applying to. If you're applying to programs in, let's say, different general categories, some community programs, and then some research powerhouses, it would make a little bit of sense to, at least in one of your paragraphs, alter what you're talking about a little bit. You know, if you're applying to a research heavy program, maybe amping up that aspect of your application, as long as it's consistent with your genuine interests and what you put on your ERAS application is totally fine. And then when you're talking about community programs, maybe you can be, you know, de-emphasizing the research and emphasizing maybe, you know, like community action, community engagement, things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So obviously there is there is that opportunity, and just knowing, you know, knowing how to navigate that is important. And obviously that's a big advantage of having someone that can work alongside you. Right. So if you're, you know, you have a team, whether it's at your school through a service like MatchPal or through your friends, you know, when you have people who are constantly revising and helping you strategize your approach, it's just one way to kind of like up the ante and be a little bit more, you know, strategic and competitive with how you write your statements.
Can I just say one other thing, Dan? Sorry,
Please.
I was gonna jump off of like Ian. Just one thing about the thing that you write about in your personal statement can come up in your interview. And every specialty is also very different. Like my specialty, we're very heavily like we read the personal statement. That's something important to us. Some specialties are not. But if you talk about something, let's say unique, like I was a dancer, I talked about it, it came up over and over and over again from my personal statement at almost every interview I went to. So it's just something, the more you talk about who you are and how you connect to your specialty, the more that you may actually talk about it during your interview as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Even though there are some, I will just piggyback off that, even though there are some specialties that notoriously might pay less attention to it, you should still take your statement seriously, because you never know when there's that one faculty at that one program that does just love reading statements and doesn't care about anything else. And then if you have a bad statement, you know, you missed an opportunity to impress or connect with someone. Let's talk about red flags. So, you know, red flags can mean anything. I mean, I think actually maybe we should set a definition, because I have met some students who thought that like not honoring a shelf or rotation meant a red flag. That is not the case. That's not what we're talking about, right? So we're talking red flags meaning like failed board exams, having any sort of like institutional action against you for like academic dishonesty or professionalism issues, having to take a leave of absence for a non-medical reason. Although honestly, sometimes even a medical leave of absence, unfortunately, can be viewed as like a little bit of like a thing that you should be explaining. So these are the things that we're talking about. I would say there's like the major red flags. There are other like middle of the road type of like things, like being like maybe an osteopathic applicant or an IMG. Like those are things that like you don't need to address in your statement, but it's something to think about, right? You may want to talk about your journey. It's not necessarily a negative thing, but you may want to just discuss it. So in general, right, when you think about the really big red flags, again, going back to like the things I said earlier, failing a board exam, having some sort of institutional action against you, where you like were suspended or had to repeat a course or something like that, right? I think it is important because these things are reflected in your MSP, and it's really hard to hide these from your programs, right? They're going to see this. And so it's like an elephant in the room. You may as well confront it and be mature about it and strategic, rather than, trying to hide it. Because in reality, people will know that about you. And then that might reflect even more poorly than the red flag is that you're trying to avoid talking about it, right? So most important thing is just really like reflecting on what happened in this issue, right? So what happened that caused the red flag? Why did you fail that test? What did you do that resulted in being, suspended or whatever? And then, going forward and really thinking very strategically about how are you going to explain that, both in the personal statement and honestly on interview day, because it will come up probably in both. So I think the main focus that I wanted to harp on and this is what I see all the time when I review these statements from students who have had to talk about these issues, is that, they write about the red flag for like the entire statement, right? You don't want to just talk about like all the things you did wrong and how bad it was and how awful it was. You don't want to do that, right? You want to still have a narrative. You want to still talk about why you love whatever specialty you love. You still want to talk about why you're going to be a rock star resident and why they should take you. But you should probably have a paragraph devoted to explaining this issue, very clearly, succinctly. And the most important thing is not even so much the issue, but what you kind of learn from that experience, right? What kind of resilience or other reflective kind of moments that you have that was a result of this, right? That actually made you arguably maybe better as an individual, maybe better as a future physician, et cetera. So, I mean, that's personally my take on red flags. I think it's not fun. You know what I mean? If you have to if you had a red flag, you know what I mean? Like it's obviously, we feel for you. It's not fun. Things happen. But this is just hopefully some helpful advice in terms of like how to bounce back from that. And obviously not all hope is lost at all. People who fail exams match every year. People who have institutional action against them match every year. It's really about how you sell it, right? It's really about how you sell it. I don't know, Michelle was chief resident and she was part of her admissions committee at her program. I don't know, do you have any advice for maybe from when you've seen red flags from the statements that you've read, or maybe from advising students?
Yeah, so we bring it up during interview day. Like a lot of times, whoever is interviewing you after that, at some point, either that day, we'll talk about all the applicants and everybody kind of talks about what they think. And red flags it is very clear. They do mark it, right? It's going to be on your MSPE. They're going to see it. And we do mention the people that kind of didn't mention it or skirted the question. And that looks bad, not just from the fact that you skirted the question, but it's also like, did you take this as an opportunity to learn? Versus we'll notice people that like, listen, this happened, life happens, nobody is perfect, but they addressed it. They talked about how they, how were they resilient in this? And it makes a difference in the conversations after your interview, especially because then you think about somebody who's matured and who knows how to handle residency is hard. How to handle, difficult situations and how to, overcome them. So things happen, but learn how, like, what did you improve on and how did you improve on yourself from the red flags?
Yeah, Ian, you have anything else to add?
Yeah, also, it might be a little late for some students, but when you do have an example of these scenarios, think about how can you really write your own comeback story? How can you show that you're capable of overcoming adversity, which you're going to see a lot of in residency? So having, worked with a lot of touring clients, seeing people who go from a failed exam to a really stellar exam score, that's like one way you can overcome adversity, but it can even be something more simple or a little bit less objective, such as, failing rotation and then juggling a lot of life events and coming back and passing that rotation later. It's all about kind of how you write your own story, and how you paint that to program directors and residency admission committees.
Yeah, exactly. It isn't. I think that's a good point. It isn't like not every outcome is going to be objective, right? Like obviously, if you have a scored outcome, that can be. And of course, you should take advantage of that opportunity, right? If you did fail an exam, the retake, you absolutely should try to crush that exam, right? Because that is the only way that somebody can justify the comeback, right? Like, so, but in most cases, it won't be objective. It'll be subjective. It'll be about the things you learned about yourself and along the way. So definitely good points to keep in mind. So common mistakes. So these are kind of some of the things that we see a lot when we edit statements and work with students. Telling the narrative of your path to your specialty, not your entire life story. So this is important, right? Because we want to get to know, like when I'm reading statements for my program, or for the clients that I work with, I'm thinking like, I want to get to know you as an individual, but I really don't need to know you from like day zero when you like were born and like all that. Some people have really fascinating life stories, and I've enjoyed connecting with people over that during interviews or even during like mentorship sessions. And those stories are worth telling, but for a lot of us, quite frankly, they're not. And there's other things that are important about your achievements that are better, more worth your time. Let's just say that, right? And so you don't need to have your entire life story. The most important thing is, how did you go from being a medical student who walked through the doors and had no idea what was going on to being a blank specialty applicant, right? What about your medical school or life experience made you interested in a specialty, and why are you going to be good at it, right? The next thing is not preaching about why your specialty is the best, right? Don't brag, right? If I'm interviewing people for IR, I already know IR is the best. That's why we're here, right? You don't need to tell me that IR is the best. You don't need to tell me why surgery is not as good or some other field is not as good or whatever. Like, I know that I take a lot of pride in my specialty. Everybody takes a lot of pride in their specialty, especially if they're on an admissions committee, right? If they're on an academic center working with residents, like they probably love their specialty, right? That's why they're in the process of recruiting fantastic talent for their specialty. So you don't need to brag, right? Just be, you have to just demonstrate understanding and commitment through your activities and through your answers. But you don't need to brag, and definitely don't talk down about other specialties. Also, don't brag about yourself, right? I mean, there's a fine line. Like, you want to talk about what your relevant achievements and experiences are that make you a good fit for a field, but you also don't want to sit there and say like how amazing you are, because quite frankly, like when you're interviewing people, I mean, you get like hundreds of applications, and from those applications, there are tens of absolutely stellar candidates. You're never going to be the best one. You know what I mean? So don't brag about that. It's not like, even if whether it's scores or research output or whatever it is, like there's no reason to brag. Like, we see the numbers, we see who like stands out and who doesn't. Like, you don't need to do that. It's not a good look as far as like professionalism goes. And obviously don't lie or plagiarize. I mean, that should be, quite frankly, common sense, but just to be sure, definitely do not do those things. And the last thing I'll say is proofread. I mean, there's nothing that ruins a great personal statement more than a grammatical error, whether it's having even something as silly as just like having like a second comma or a second period, or like just like misspelling a simple word. Like, it just shows a lack of attention to detail. And obviously, like, this is a very important document, probably one of the most important pieces of writing that you're going to have as in your entire medical school career. Make sure that there's no silly mistakes in it, right? It's grammatical or otherwise. So I would say like that's like really just like very common things that we see, and we help students try to kind of deviate away from making these kinds of errors. Ian or Michelle, any common mistakes that you see, either the ones listed here or otherwise, that you would advise students maybe on how to avoid, or anything that you want to add?
I think one thing that really makes a statement stand out in a bad way is a superficial description of the specialty that you're going into. We talked a little bit before about communicating your fit and making sure that you're displaying a nuanced understanding. If you give a surface level explanation of your specialty, talking about how much you love it, it just kind of makes it look like you haven't done the necessary exploration for someone about to go into that field. So that would definitely be something to avoid at all costs, is a really superficial understanding of the specialty. And another thing that kind of comes up when you talk about plagiarism that I thought of is there's been a lot of discussion on the internet about using large language models for writing the personal statement this year, ChatGPT and the like. I would say that I would definitely advise against that. Personal statement is supposed to be personal. I don't necessarily think you would get caught for doing something like that. However, there's a chance, and I think it would require a lot of studying of said AI generated personal statement to really have it down pat as your own like personal narrative that you would express in interviews. So I would definitely advise making sure you write it yourself.
Yeah, and if you are going to use tools like that, at the very least, be cognizant of the limitations, like Ian was saying. Like, it's definitely never going to be actually personal, and it's never going to be kind of specific to you. If you want to use it to generate an outline or to help you, like maybe like make a some sort of framework, or maybe rewrite a paragraph that you already wrote, sure. Right. Maybe you're not, obviously not everyone's going to be a fantastic writer. It's totally fine. We're doctors, not writers at the end of the day, but just know its limitations and be careful, because, again, you don't want to you don't want to trust this important thing and with something that is like obviously not really built to do this kind of stuff. Michelle, is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, just for dual applicants, if you're applying as to secondary specialty, just be mindful, as someone who, a lot of people apply to family medicine as a secondary specialty. A lot of times we can tell. It doesn't mean that you won't get interviews. People get interviews, but try to put some effort into the personal statement to show that you have some interest. Otherwise, we can just tell, especially like based on the application. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that probably warrants its own like little like tangent, because a lot of people are going to be dual applying. The residency process is getting more and more competitive every year, and people will be dual applying, and I don't think there's anything per se wrong with that, right? As long as you actually do, like Michelle said, as long as you actually have interest in the other specialty, it's okay to have a backup. It's okay to apply to a backup, but be careful with like how much you're reusing from your statement, and like make sure that, like, obviously this is more of like a clerical thing, but like when you actually upload your statements, make sure you're assigning the right statement to the right programs, right? Because you're going to be able to assign every program different documents. So definitely keep that in mind. Make sure you're assigning the right statement, the right letters to the right programs. So that's something for down the road. It's not really part of the writing process, but for sure something that I can see people mess up if they're rushing or not being careful enough. So keep that in mind as well. All right, let's do a live editing example. So this is like a really unique thing that we were trying to do with our webinar this time around, is like trying to bring something creative and creative to the table, and wanting to just spend some moments with an excerpt. So this is actually a student that I worked with myself, a student applying for anesthesia. This is the first, I would say, solid draft. So I kind of snipped the paragraph from it, and obviously there were many revisions after this. But I want everyone to take a moment. We can maybe, I think everyone here can read. I don't really think we need to read it out loud, but maybe everyone could take a moment to familiarize themselves with this. And me and then the other Michelle and Ian will take a moment to like kind of dissect it, what works, what doesn't, and maybe provide ways to, rephrase some of these things. So I'll give everyone a minute just to kind of read this over, and then we will kind of give y'all our input. All right. So maybe Ian, you want to get us started here with like, what stands out to you as like what is working here and what is not working for you?
Definitely. So one of the things I'm noticing that is working is they have some pretty solid writing, like the second sentence, for example, it's an amalgam of this. That is a pretty nice flow. However, when you like kind of look at the paragraph as a whole, it seems like a little bit of a superficial description of the specialty, kind of like I was describing before. I think maybe some more personal anecdotes, some more patient-centered narrative would really go a long way to improving this paragraph, to really show that they have an understanding about what being an anesthesiologist entails.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, like, again, good language, right? I think there's a disconnect between the first and second half too. I think like in the beginning, you're talking like the student is writing about anesthesia and describe, trying to, like, I guess, convince the reader that they understand all of these different elements that anesthesiology kind of encompasses, which is true. There's nothing factually incorrect here, right? But at the same time, they switch gears very abruptly, right? Into just kind of talking about what they want to do, right? So I think this is one thing, having a good flow, very, very important, right? So even though maybe if you split this paragraph down the middle, like in half, you might see like two very nice, like snippets, but together this doesn't really work. I'm kind of like losing the writer in the process a little bit, because I'm kind of like, where is this going? Michelle, anything additionally that you're thinking about as far as what works and what doesn't?
Yeah. I agree with the solid writing. It's almost as if the beginning is like the introduction of the personal statement, the end's the end of the personal statement. So there's like a whole section that we're missing. And the reason you're missing this is because it's kind of what that last statement is. There's no clear goal of what this paragraph is meant to do. And it tells you nothing about the person at all. Like, yes, he's interested in anesthesiology, but there's nothing about him that shows why he's interested and why this is the field for this person and why he's a good fit. I think, again, every sentence that you put into a personal statement should have a purpose. It should serve some purpose, either as a transition or an explanation. And the more kind of what Ian was saying, that surface level, the more your personal statement is surface level, the less purpose words or, the sentences are creating. So when you're writing your personal statement or when people are editing, think about, do you really even need this sentence? And if you look at this paragraph, a lot of it you might not need because it's not actually doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And I would argue, like, maybe not even necessarily you wouldn't need it, but certainly you would need to reorganize it and, move things around, maybe cut a sentence to start a future paragraph, fill in this paragraph with different content. Like, you could start off by saying something like anesthesiology is this amalgam of all of these different things, right? And that's great. It shows that you understand the different like disciplines within anesthesia. I think one thing that this would benefit, what Ian was saying, which would be phenomenal, is that if you can show an example, right? If you could say, hey, one thing that really is maybe understated is like the patient care and how much patients trust you, right? Patients are trusting us with their lives every single day, and we're able to, be there for them in some of their scariest moments. And you don't have to say all that, but you could describe that by giving an example of how you're a third or fourth year medical student and, you're sitting here helping an anesthesiologist take consent. You're helping a patient who's like crying or super anxious, and, you're able to calm them down. You're able to, well, you can't give them food because they're probably going into surgery, but you're able to give them, some sort of solace and comfort to going into it. And like, that's an attractive aspect to the field, in addition to all of these kind of like technical disciplines, and then maybe tying that anecdote with something personally about you, about, your history of empathy or your history of connecting with people or some other experience you've had, right? And now you can see how that narrative changes tremendously, right? Now you're showing that you understand the hard stuff. You're also demonstrating a little bit of the soft things, a little bit of the things that make it more personable and relatable. And then after that, you can go ahead and go on to something along the lines of like, maybe with your final paragraph, you can say, you want to enter a program with this, and maybe explain why. I think this is like, like well-rounded physicians and, what I mean, confidence. I mean, like, yeah, we all want that, right? Like at the end of the day, we all want to become confident, well-rounded physicians, and we all want to deliver the highest level of care. So I would call this fluff, and I'll probably get rid of that and replace it with, more tangible descriptions of what are you really looking for, right? Like we're all looking for this stuff. What I'm really looking for is to work maybe in an academic setting. Fine, that's fair, right? There are academic settings versus community settings. That's a descriptor, right? You might be looking to train in an environment that maybe prioritizes diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe it prioritizes a certain type of procedure or a certain type of workflow, right? Or a certain type of research project. And you can state those things. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, obviously it can limit you at places that don't focus on those things, but that is actually tangible, and it shows the reader that you're focused and you actually have thought about this. Like, oh, I know exactly what I want, and here's what I'm looking for. And you had you had the, I guess, like the foresight to say it outright, the confidence to say it outright. So I guess that's like my thoughts about this one. I think we have one more example of this. So we'll kind of run this again. So I'll have everyone read this second one, and then we'll give the panel a chance to answer. We'll do the same thing over again, just to give a second example of some statement guidance. Again, this is another student that I worked with. This one is a student applying for radiology. All right, so Ian, or I don't know, we started with Ian last time. Maybe Michelle, you want to tell me maybe what's working here for our student applying to radiology here?
Yeah, I think they definitely describe who they are a little bit more than the first one, right? So this is a fast-paced person. They like to do things, finishing exams. So you get to know a little bit more about the person, which is nice. I think the hard part is that you kind of lose it into like, where does it 100% fit into radiology? And how does that connect that person? I agree that like kind of that's like not focused or fitting, but the example, rather than saying like, I'm a naturally fast-paced person, give an example, and doesn't have to be anything, like this was me racing cars or something like that. But it could be something like, I was a really fast reader. I remember I would read through all of my books I don't know, when I was a kid and during the summer, and I read like 15 books, something like that. Give an example that can be funny, but also shows your personality and who you are as a person, rather than saying those words like we've been saying. And then I do agree about the fact that that is an intern's job. As a first year, you are very much acting independently. So you don't have to say what, you want to say what you're going to want to do as an intern in the future, but rather like use your current experiences to describe, why can you act more independently? How can you formulate differential diagnoses rather than stating it, which is kind of what I think we've been saying, but.
Yeah. Exactly. Ian, what are you thinking?
Yeah, one thing that I'm noticing in this example is tone, right? So there's a little bit of things that are coming off as bragging, talking about how quick they are to finish exams, performing things at a high level of proficiency. And in addition to maybe coming off as a little overconfident, it's also coming off a little bit impersonal. So as an intern, they're going to amass many patients. I think maybe a better way of stating that is talking about caring for patients rather than amassing them, right? You don't want to just talk about juggling clinical responsibility. You want to talk about that interpersonal connection and that humanistic aspect. So some things that I think they could maybe be doing a little bit better, as Michelle said, giving some examples that are like playful about how are you a fast person? Like, how is your life fast paced? And something that doesn't come off as bragging, maybe something from childhood, something that's funny or a little self-deprecating would be completely appropriate. And then when you want to talk about, it looks like they're probably trying to talk about applying to intern year prior to radiology, really nail down that humanistic side of how you're going to be in your medicine year rather than the really analytic and performance-based side.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think you guys hit the nail on the head as far as the things that we should change. And I think in general, I think one thing is like, there's another disconnect here as well, right? I mean, it's okay to talk about being fast paced. I think some more specific examples like Michelle and Ian mentioned would be great. But I also think there's a little bit of a disconnect as to why this matters to radiology. Like, I know I am a radiology resident. So is Ian. We know it's fast paced. We know the workload is hard, but at the same time, like you're kind of like, you're not really like making it clear, like how these skills of like finishing an exam or a meal are going to translate to being like a really good radiologist or someone that I want to work with. Right. So I think that's also important. Again, anecdotes would be great. Like really like 2 to 3 sentences long anecdotes from your past, whether it's a radiology based activity or maybe a leadership activity that you can kind of show how you juggled that or did it at a high level of kind of showing that like, hey, like, I did this as a medical student, like some impressive leadership activity while being a medical student, like that shows like you're able to balance things at a high level of proficiency rather than stating it, if that makes sense. And yeah, and avoid, don't, I know like some of these things sound, I guess, like as a medical student, they can sound like, this would be so cool if I was like formulating differentials and like amassing patients. But like when you're on the other side, it doesn't really reflect that well, because one, like we said earlier, these are kind of like basic duties of an intern, and two, it's like, you should also, like, this guy's writing about radiology, but then intern year, like it's not really like relevant either, honestly. So make sure it's relevant. I guess, like, we can wrap up here. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions on purpose, so everyone here is like, we have tons of time, 20 minutes. You have 3 of us here till 9 o'clock Eastern here to answer your questions. While you guys think of your questions, I wanted to give you the opportunity to work with us, with someone from our team. Thanks for coming to the webinar. You all get 10% off discount for any of our services, whether it's a 1-hour package or anything in between. So, if you're interested, you could scan this QR code, fill out a consultation form, and one of us will talk to you, answer any questions you have, see if it's a good fit for you. And, everyone is welcome to write questions in the chat, turn on your mics. This is a super informal environment. We're here to help you. We want to help you. That's why we're here. So definitely let us know if you have any questions about anything we said, or if anything relating to your statement is on your mind. And thanks for coming.
Can I say 2 other things? Sorry. One
Of
thing,
course.
it's okay to use experiences from college. Like, that's fine. You can use it in your personal statement. If it's something that you either did through medical school or were really passionate about, again, I wouldn't use only college experiences, but it's okay to use like one. Like, I was a dancer in college. I did it in med school. It is something important to me. It was in my personal statement. And that's fine. And then the other thing is, it's also okay to throw out your first draft of your personal statement. I did that multiple times when I was applying to med school, residency, fellowship. I literally just deleted my whole draft and restarted it. Or like, you would use like smaller parts of it because it just wasn't showing what I wanted it to. So if you are at that point, it's okay. Don't worry, you'll be able to write something that's kind of important and shows who you are.
Thank you, Michelle. Definitely agree with that. Yeah, anybody have any questions that you want to ask? Well, you got us on the line. Got a question in the chat, maybe. So we have a US IMG interested in research. Sadly, home environment was hard to find research, working on projects. Only one of them got published. How do I show that interest in my personal statement? So I guess the question boils down to, if you don't have a lot of research output, how do you show interest in the research? So, to be fair, right? I mean, obviously, like, your publications get listed, but you can still list that you've had many research, many research experiences, right, on your ERAS. Okay, so that would be one way to say, like, you've had all these experiences. Now, I would advise you that you definitely should try to get things published, right? As if you're applying this year, I mean, it might be kind of cutting it close, but whatever you got to do to get those last things that have tie up any loose ends, get those done. You can talk about your experiences. You could talk about, what you enjoy about research, what you find gratifying, what kind of topics you're interested in. And hopefully it does relate to the experiences that you already had. And, hopefully that spurs a conversation during the interview day where you're able to express that in a little bit more detail. That's what I would say. I don't know if anyone else in the panel has anything to add.
Yeah, I'll say that having one publication in medical school is, above average for certain specialties. When we're talking about publication numbers in ERAS, the reported numbers include abstracts, posters, as well as journal publications. If you came through and got a real serious journal publication, that's a really big achievement to talk about depending on what specialty you're going into. So I wouldn't sell yourself too short and think that you can't talk about research just because you only had one journal publication. If it's something that's really true to your narrative, it's going to come through when you write. So I would just make sure to show how that's going to fit into your future career, how that fits into your personal narrative.
That's all very, very, very good advice. We've got another question here about red flags. Should we mention them before or after the main personal statement questions? Honestly, I mean, it depends. If you're writing a chronological statement, it's probably going to be at the end, right? So a lot of the statements, I find chronological statements to just be easier to follow, right? So if I'm like actually doing the interview thing for my program, it would be really annoying if I had to think about like you now, and then going back to you as like a college student or med student, and then going back to you now, like I don't think that's like really logical. So if you are chronological, then it does make sense for it to be last, almost as like a, as like a thing that you're, kind of like you're writing all the good things, and you're acknowledging this one thing at the end, but hopefully you've left a good impression by the first 3 or 4 paragraphs, So that would be my take. I don't think there is a right answer here, to be honest, right? I don't, at the end of the day, as long as you address it, it's okay. And as long as it flows well, it's okay. I think ultimately, I don't know if there's a right answer, but I think it's going to come down to pretty specific nuance with that one.
I agree. I don't think there's a right answer. I think it depends on the type of red flag, though. If it is something that, delayed it just depends on what the red flag is. If it's something that really like stands out on your application, I think there's nothing wrong with addressing it first. But again, it also just depends on the way that you're structuring your personal statement and what is like, your main goals of your personal statement. And how you want to do that. So there's nothing wrong with putting it at the end. And then if you write it and then you're like, well, it fits better when it's higher up, move it higher up because it fits better and it flows better.
Yeah. As far as the year of graduation, so I'm not really sure. I don't think so. I think the year you graduate is the year you graduate. I don't think that would be something that changes based on any other clinical experiences that you have, whether they're fellowships or otherwise. So the year you graduate medical school is the year you graduate. So, yeah. What do we got? Bragging and listing our strong sides. That's a good one. Okay. So we could definitely talk about that. To show that you're a good fit for the program. It's some tips to avoid bragging while expressing interest and strong sides. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about this. Again, I think you just want to avoid using language that is, one, difficult to support with your CV and what you think your letters of rec say about you, right? So if you're not you should never brag bottom line. You should never say I'm the best. You should never say I am, I'm going to be the best resident you've ever had. You should never say I'm the smartest. You should never say those things, right? But, if you have, there's certain things you can get away with. I think if you're truly at one end of a spectrum, right, you can talk about things like saying that you're going to be, like, for example, if you're the type of person who does have a lot of research experience, right, and you've had like 30 publications, and you have like a ton of posters, and you've like gone all over the country presenting at conferences and whatever, you, in my opinion, can totally say that you are a very valuable asset to the research team. I don't see anything wrong with that because you have evidence that supports that, right? So you could say something along the lines of, I'm very well versed in all aspects of the research process, as and my passion lies within interventional radiology, blah blah blah, this particular thing, and I would love to contribute that as an asset to your team. You could say that. If you don't have that, that's going to sound really silly, right? It's not going to sound good, right? So you have to think about where your strengths and weaknesses are, and everybody has them. Everybody has things that they're good at, and everybody has things that they're just not good at. We can't be good at everything, right? So my advice to you is to really do some reflection and look at your application and think about what it is that you bring to the table. And those are the things you can try to sell, right? And stay away from using strong language to describing things that you cannot sell, right? That you don't have evidence to support, if that makes sense. So that's what I'll say about that. We have, I think, one other question. Let's see. Could you expand upon examples of specialties and appropriate tone for the statement? I'm applying OB-GYN, looking to balance empathy, compassion. I think that's great. Yeah. I mean, I think that for OB-GYN, I think you're spot on, right? I mean, I think like OB is like this intersection of surgery and primary, like exactly what you said, honestly, so I think you'd be very right to strike that balance. I don't know. What do you think, Michelle?
I think so. It just depends on the examples, but if you have the patient examples, like you had a patient during your OB-GYN, that you did primary care for, that you did PAPs for, versus when you were in the OR doing, C-section or gyn-onc surgeries, right? That's the dichotomy that you're trying to show. You can use those examples and how you can do both, be compassionate with that primary care patient, but also know how to, not act during surgeries, but like the importance of what is involved in surgery. So using those adjectives differently and using those stories to show that you can do both sides of OBGYN. I just wanted to say that adjectives are important when you're looking at your strength. Using adjectives like I would be valuable to the program because of this. Even though you're a confident person, and what makes you confident isn't the fact that you have 30 publications and you know everything. It's the fact that you put in a lot of work, and that you're a hardworking person, and it's shown on your application. So the way that you describe things, it's really important in the personal statement, and using those adjectives that are not as strong as Dan was saying.
Yeah. Ian, what do you think about the Marina's question? Anything that you've seen that stands out, that's like memorable from your experience? And do you think, I guess that shows an applicant competency for residency and knowledge in the field? Do you think this is more valued than parts of the PS that show empathy and advocating? I think it's specialty specific personally, but I don't know. Ian, what do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely specialty specific. As Michelle was saying earlier, you're going to write a very different statement for FM, talking about, how you're passionate about certain primary care topics and patient interaction, as opposed to something more procedural. You might be talking about more technical or competency-based, skill-based things. But yeah, I would say something that really stands out is not only, coming up with these anecdotes that are very useful, show that you spent a lot of time in the field, but also really nuanced reflection on said anecdotes. So, you have an interaction with the patient, to use the OBGYN example, in the primary care clinic. And maybe you're able to dig a little bit deeper into maybe some of the inequities or things that this patient is going through. And maybe you help the patient navigate some of those things and gave them a better outcome. That would be a really great way of saying, I'm really dedicated to my patients. I'll go the extra mile, without straight up saying, I'm so dedicated. That comes back to the not bragging sort of thing. If you can show, not tell, something that really just clearly shows these features about you, you don't have to say them and you don't have to brag. It'll just be evident to the reader. So I would say those are the ones that really stand out to me when people have great stories about the specialty they're going into, and the really good reflections on them that don't require a ton of explanation. They're almost self-evident because it's a really good narrative.
Excellent, Ian. I mean, I couldn't have said, I agree with everything you said. That was very well said. For Mary's question about not dual applying. So I guess showing commitment to a specialty like FM, where people may often dual apply. That's actually a really good question. And you may have some diverse experiences, but now you realize FM is the right specialty for you. How do you show that it's the commitment? I think I'm going to give Michelle the opportunity to answer this. I just want to say one quick thing though, because Michelle is the FM expert. I want to say one quick thing. So if you're the type of person who has a lot of diverse experiences, remember this year you can only include 10 things on ERAS, which means that not everything needs to go into your application, right? So the things that are like not significant, right? And I'm not saying that you can't figure out a way to make a leadership experience, whether it's surgery or otherwise, relevant to an FM application, right? And obviously your publications, you're going to be proud of them and you're going to want to list them because they add value to your application. So there's really no avoiding that part. But just be careful with which activities you select for your 10 and how you write about them. And that's obviously one other way where it's so important to have advisors, mentors to review this stuff and help you, because what your intuition might be right, it might be wrong. And it's always good to have the perspective of someone who's done this and evaluated candidates on your side. But Michelle, what do you think? What would be something that would, in this situation, if somebody had non-FM experiences that they were kind of inevitably including, like publications for ortho, how would that make, how should she go about that?
So I had, there was an applicant a couple of years ago who I think was like straight urology until maybe the end of his third year, and was like, I really do not want to do urology. I realized I want to do primary care. Now, this is not the same example because he actually did apply into primary care, but most of his stuff on his application was urology. And so what he did was he was like, listen, you know, I love urology. I think this is the part that why I wanted to do urology. But then I realized that this is what drew me to family medicine. And family medicine, again, it's very primary care heavy. So we're not very surgical. We do minor procedures, but we stick with the patients. We do a lot of longitudinal stuff. We do a lot of health advocacy. We do care coordinations. So the part that it doesn't mean you have to rewrite your whole personal statement, but just put into the account, you know, if you're going to write a separate personal statement, you should say like, you know, this is the part of family medicine that I enjoy, and you should know what family medicine is.
Yeah.
And talk to your colleagues. And it could be the part that you didn't like when you were on your family medicine rotation. That's why you want to do ortho.
I think Michelle, I think she wanted to do, or I think she's actually very similar to your urology guy. Wanted to do ortho once upon a time, but now has come around to saying she wants to do FM. But basically, she's like, I have all this ortho experience. How do I convince you that I'm not an ortho applicant?
100% your personal statement. It could literally be like, hey, this is what drew me to ortho. And then I realized, you know what, I actually want to do family medicine. Right. And what is it about family? And that's why I have all this stuff. And it doesn't mean that nobody's going to take you, because that's probably what they're going to talk about at your interview.
And I want to add one thing that just popped into my head. I think what we on the interviewer side find the most fascinating is your journey to your specialty. We love hearing, how did you find your way to some spot, especially if it's like obviously we all do FM rotation. So FM is not niche, but like the more niche fields, surgical subspecialties, radiology, like we love trying to connect with you on like, how did you discover it? What was your first exposure? Why are you passionate about it? Right. So if ortho was the conduit through which you discovered FM, I don't think an FM person is ever going to be upset about that. Right. I think they're going to be really happy that you did that ortho thing. And then now, you know, join them. So
super excited. If you want to join us. So there's nothing wrong. Your personal statement, if you write that, will be great. And it explains exactly why you only have ortho on your application.
Yeah.
One other thing that I just thought of is, you know, if you're going into FM and you have some ortho experience, if you're genuinely interested in sports medicine, or that would be one kind of thing that dovetails nicely. Another thing I really commonly see is people who maybe thought ortho and are now applying radiology. If you are genuinely interested in MSK, that can make a nice story as well. So there's opportunities like I am into gastro, and general surgery is another one that often goes together well. So there's a lot of opportunities where if you were genuinely interested in one thing and switch to another, and the research kind of like goes by the topic area, you can definitely talk about that and how it led to you becoming interested in the second field.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't really think anyone's ever going to hold you to that subspecialty decision anyway. So you can easily sell a story right now that you love sports medicine and FM is the way to get to it. And then if you don't end up doing sports, I mean, I don't really think anybody's going to hunt you down and saying, why didn't you do sports? Right. So the most important thing is that you know why FM and you actually want to do it. And I think if you do that, I mean, that'll be clear. We'll do one last question from Mohammed. So deadline for submission is September. Currently working on is emailing directors afterwards so basically our updates okay? So yes, the answer is obviously yes. So major updates, like if you took step 2, retook an exam, published something, totally encouraged. You may not get a response. Program coordinators and directors' emails are slammed. They're busy. They can't respond to everything. Sometimes if they're really nice and you catch them at a good time, they'll say received, period. And that'll be really good. But yes, I always encourage candidates that they have a meaningful update for sure. I don't think there's anything wrong. I don't think it can go against you in any way, you know, so definitely. And you can write on ERAS, you know, when you're entering your research experiences, you can basically tag them as like in the process of writing, submitted, published, in press. Like there's all these different like tags to show like, I guess, the status of your project, right? So if your project is currently like under review, you can tag it as such and then email them later saying, hey, that project that I listed as under review is actually accepted now and is getting published. And that's like a really cool update to say, you know, especially if it's something that maybe your, you know, program is really into, right? Or even if they're not, it's still totally fine. But yeah, I want to be mindful of our mentors' time. So I'm gonna cut it here. Everybody should follow us on all of our socials. We're on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, giving tons of free advice every single week. I want to thank everyone for their time and our mentors as well, as this was fantastic. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it. And stay tuned for the next one. And if you're interested in our services, fill out the form. Thank you guys.